All right, now we're live. Okay. Hey guys, welcome to the Thursday's webinar. I'd like to go ahead and kind of share with you a little bit about what we're going to be covering today. We're going to go over something a little bit different. I know typically we go through kind of a PowerPoint presentation or maybe some screen sharing, but I figured today would be good to kind of go over some whiteboard training and kind of get a little more of a visual look on how we're going through our wholesaling 101 class. Now, what we'd like to do is to kind of go over today is a little bit of the step-by-step process from number one, starting in your business, what you need to get started with, all the way through A through Z, basically going through the sales process and going through the acquiring of the property and selling the property, all the way down to closing. And we're going to touch a little bit about every little step of the process. But one thing we probably won't cover a lot on today is kind of more of the marketing side, the actual, different types of ways to market to sellers to be able to bring those people in. And we're really just kind of covering the basics of wholesaling. We're not going to go real deep into detail about each step, but if you want to learn more about that kind of stuff, I do have some trainings on bringing in buyers or bringing in sellers, and that's going to cover a lot more of the details on the marketing side for bringing those kind of clients in. So let's go ahead and get started, guys. Basically, we are going to talk about wholesaling. Just to kind of give you a brief synopsis of what wholesaling is, essentially it is a glorified brokeraging. The reason why I like wholesaling is because you can take properties that are in that lower price point, like the 40, 50, even $100,000 or less price point homes, and you can take those properties and then you can wholesale them out for a much larger fee than you would anyone get a commission. Even on a 6% deal, on a $50,000 property, you're talking $3,000. Most of the time, you're asking for $5,000, $7,000, or $10,000 on those kinds of properties. So you're really going to get a bigger bang for your buck as a wholesaler. And there are some disclosures, as it's as if you are an agent. You need to disclose that you are an agent, and I typically do that on your first phone call. And we'll kind of go into that a little bit more when you're talking more to the sellers. But essentially, working on a wholesale deal, you're essentially tying up the property in a contract and flipping it to a new buyer for the difference in price. And that's what's going to be called your assignment fee, which you can essentially think of as a commission, but it's going to be in the term of an assignment fee. And that's what you're going to get at closing. And so that's kind of a synopsis of what wholesaling is. But let's kind of start with the first process and what you're going to do. The first thing you want to do when you're starting your wholesaling business. Now, a lot of people think that you want to start going out and start finding motivated sellers. The first thing you want to do is you want to go out and start building your buyer's list. Oh man, that's a little crooked, but you really want to start building up those buyer's lists for a couple different reasons. Now, the reason why is the biggest reason is because once you do get a motivated seller and that seller wants to sell quickly, you're gonna need somebody to sell to. You want to start building up your buyer's list of buyers that buy all different kinds of properties, whether that be owner finance, buy and hold, fix and flip, all different kinds of price points. You want to find buyers in all different kinds of areas, bigger buyers, smaller buyers. It really just kind of depends because you've got a large variety of different investors out there. And so you really want to be able to attain all the different kind of buyers that are going to be in different kind of spectrums. So that way you're not limited when you go out and find the right kind of property as far as being able to sell that. One thing you also want to kind of do is not only with buyers, you also want to find other wholesalers. The reason why is because whenever you're looking at getting started, a lot of times other wholesalers are going to have properties. Make sure I got my wiper. Yeah. Wholesalers are going to have other kind of properties that may fit your buyers, and vice versa. You may have buyers that fit their kind of properties. So you always want to network and start building those buyers lists or that wholesalers list as well. Keep those two separate so then whenever you are selling a property, you're marketing to your buyers or your other wholesalers you could co-wholesale with. But you want to start building those lists up because, two, you want to have a way of selling that property relatively quick, and two, you want to be able to start having what people call reverse wholesaling, where you find out the areas that are most targeted by your buyers and the price points and things like that, because then you'll be able to target your sellers list and be able to market in certain areas where you have the most buyers. So then you have the biggest potential to be able to sell that property and actually make a fee. So that's the first thing you want to get started. There's several ways to kind of build that up. Again, I said, we've got tons of marketing training videos that kind of go over any kind of way to kind of bring in those kind of buyer leads. But you want to also set those up on an email list. We've got Constant Contact's a big one, MailChimp, Wix.com has a great email system. You need to start putting these guys into an email database so then whenever you start getting these properties, you can email out to them fast and quick, and or have some people on your top 10 VIP lists that are going to be hot buyers that are going to buy in certain areas. And so that's the first thing you need to do. Start building up that list. Start making it pretty large. I'd say you typically want to have about 100 solid buyers on your list before you really start going out there and marketing for sellers. You're going to at least need a good network to start building up before you really start bringing in those big time deals, because you're going to need some way to be able to market and be able to sell those properties without having to close them yourself. So guys, the next thing you want to do, next step in the process, is going to be going out and getting sellers. And that's going to be putting together your marketing campaigns. It's going to be putting together all the kinds of deals that you're going to need to do. It's going to be basically marketing in certain areas that you think that your buyers are going to be most anticipated to go out and buy from. Now, the sellers are also going to be motivated sellers. So let me explain a few things. And there's a big reason why I like also being an agent and also being an investor. A motivated seller is going to be somebody who wants to sell the property either very quickly or for a deep discount because there's some sort of motivation there. Now, that can be in the terms of divorce, could be in the terms of inheritance, a probate, someone lost their family member. It could be in the term of, in pre-foreclosure, and or just, they're moving, or house needs too much repairs, or there's a troublesome tenant in place. There's a ton of motivated reasons why people just want to dump their property for a very good price. Now, the thing here is that you've got to remember, not everyone you call and not every lead that comes in is going to be a motivated seller. So a lot of times, you'll call somebody, you'll kind of go through your worksheet with them or your script. You'll get some information, and then you'll ask them, well, hey, what's the price? If we were paying cash, what's the lowest price that you would take for your property? And of course, if they give you a number that's really like a retail price, where it's maybe like a $5,000 discount, and the property is worth $200,000, you're going to tell them, well, hey, that really doesn't work for us as far as an investment price. Is that the lowest you could probably go if we were paying cash and closing quickly, or would they be anywhere negotiable on that price? And so sometimes when a seller comes back and says, no, we're nowhere near negotiable. This is the price that we want. If we don't get this price, we can wait around or stick around till we get that kind of price. Well, from our standpoint, that's not going to be an appointment that we want to go out and go on, because it's going to be a complete waste of time. We're not going to get the kind of price and the kind of property that we want. So those are leads that you need to turn and somehow flip those over into a retail or a listing type appointment. So the best thing that you can do is take those kind of leads and ask them, okay, seller, it seems like this kind of property does not match our criteria as far as an investment property. But as I said from the very beginning, I am a real estate agent, and if you are interested in selling your property, have you considered using a real estate agent in helping selling your home? And that kind of leads you into the basically the objection side of what most sellers are going to come back and say. If you've gone through if you've gone through our buyer and seller script training, it kind of explains a little more detail about, if we're working with a motivated seller, asking those kinds of questions, and then turning those over into a listing or retail script. There's a bunch of objections most sellers are going to come back at you with. The biggest one, of course, being commissions. They don't want to sell because they're commissioned. They don't want to pay one. There's a lot of reasons why. Or a lot of big reasons or big numbers on why you can come back and say, hey, these are the reasons why you need to use a real estate agent. It's not just about selling your home, it's about closing your home. And those are some of the biggest bullet points that you can bring to this table and using to that seller. But when you're talking with that seller, this is also the biggest reason why I like being a real estate agent and also being an investor, is because, of course, you're going to make more money wearing your investor hat first and going into that appointment. But whenever you're going and talking with that seller and you're realizing no way, shape, or form is this going to be enough motivation and or a type of deal that's going to work for investment. Let's turn this into something like maybe a listing appointment and get something out of this lead. And so that's a good way to be able to turn those sellers into good listing appointments, especially if you can convince them or motivate them to understand the value that you're going to bring as an agent. So just keep in mind, don't try to make every single seller a motivated seller. Not everybody is going to be in deep crap and needs to be able to sell today. There is some sellers that aren't going to be as motivated, that are going to be potential listing appointments for you. But don't try to force feed, a seller into making them into a motivated seller or an investment type property. It's not always going to work. And then whenever you send that out to your buyers, it's not going to be the kind of price that they want. So it's going to be, a way that buyers are not going to read your emails as much because they know you're not going to get the best kind of deals. So make sure you're working with motivated sellers. Turn those sellers into listing appointments when you can. But make sure that you're working with motivated sellers, and that when you talk with them on the phone, my biggest pitch is like, hey, if I was paying cash, could you close quickly? Would you be anywhat flexible on that price? And if they are flexible on the price, that kind of leads us into our third step in the process, which is really the appointment. Not apartment, appointment. But, that's really what, whenever I hear that they are motivated, that they are flexible on that price, that, they do want to take a little bit lower price than what's on the market just to start out with, then that's the time when I want to go out and actually set that appointment and go out and view the property. Now, once you actually get to that property, there's a few things you got to do. Of course, the biggest thing I'd say, the biggest thing is building rapport with that seller, getting on their side, recognizing their needs, recognizing what they're going through, being relative in what they want, and kind of listening to them as far as what they're telling you about the property, what they're telling you about their life and what's going on. Being considerate, relating with them about certain things that they want or that they need. Those are big selling points. And think about it too. You're not coming there to take advantage of these guys, or you're not coming there to swoop in and take their property out from under them. You're wanting to build a rapport with these guys because they're going to be great references for you in the future. Whenever you're working with sellers who are not quite, they're up to speed with what we want to do, it's going to be great to be able to refer those kind of sellers that have, gone through this process, that you've done great business with and they've had a great experience with, that you can send to those new leads, those new sellers, and be able to walk them through the process, make them feel a little more comfortable about using you. Now, the biggest thing is that when you go on this appointment, next biggest thing is that you want to make sure you take a walkthrough on the property. You get an idea from the seller, what work has been done to this property, what work has not been done to this property, what needs to be done, what's not working. It's kind of like, you want to walk through the property with them, and you want them to kind of follow in behind you. Because when you're going through this process, it's kind of like when you go, sell a car. The guys at the dealership are not going to sit there and they're not going to say, okay, I looked at your car, or I looked at it from the window and it looks like it's good, it's got this kind of value and this is what we're going to give you for it. No, they're going to walk through the car with you. They're going to look at every single detail. They're going to make sure something, this works or that works. They may go test drive the vehicle. There's a lot of things that they do on their due diligence side to make sure that the car that they're buying is going to be worth the value that they're going to be paying for it. It's the same thing in real estate. You've got to walk through the house with the seller and point out any kind of imperfections with that house. That's probably one of the biggest things I've seen most wholesalers kind of miss over, is that they'll walk through the house and then they'll kind of compliment the seller on, oh, that's great windows, and oh, that's great doors, oh, that's great hardware, oh, is this new flooring, those kinds of things, which to a certain point, yes, you want to say those certain things because you may want the seller to kind of feel appreciative or an understanding of, hey, I have updated the flooring, or I have done this, or I have done that. Now, take that with a grain of salt as far as like updatability. If the property has been updated, but it's been, they put some cheap laminate countertops or some cheap vinyl flooring that's, really not the best for the area, take that in consideration whenever you're talking with them about pricing. But when you're walking through the property, point out every imperfection, point out any any scratch on the walls, any door jams that don't work, any kind of AC vents that may be dirty. I mean, point out the even minutest thing that might be able to get you the best price possible, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to get that property for a good enough deal where there's room to wholesale that property out and for the investor to still have room to make money. So remember, walk through the property, point out every little imperfection, and make sure they notice everything that you're pointing out as well. Because when you start building this up, when you're going down and sitting down with them at the actual table, those are going to be great negotiation points whenever you start saying, okay, seller, I know you wanted, 75,000, and we understand that with this 75,000, there's some either foundation, maybe roof, maybe some obvious things that need to be done, but there was definitely some other things that you're not accounting for, we're not accounting for at this price. So after walking through this home, I need to offer you $55,000. And yes, I tell you, if you didn't go through and walk through the house with them and explain to them why you're now offering this price, they're going to get super upset. They're going to be pissed off. They're going to think you're trying to take advantage of them. You've got to explain to them the reasoning behind why you want to offer this price. And so by walking through the steps with them and making them understand, this is what we need to be able to move forward, and these are the reasons why, then it's going to be a lot easier for them to swallow that pill as far as the pricing goes, because they're going to say, okay, well, that makes more sense. So and again, if you offer them a price, always keep in mind what your bottom dollar is. At some certain point, if they're not willing to budge, then sometimes it makes more sense to just kind of walk away. I've walked away from more deals than I have done some. So that don't always be discouraged by walking away from a deal. You might be the best one that's offered them the best kind of price, and then what happens is they end up calling you back maybe a month, maybe 6 months, maybe even a year later, and go, hey man, I know we talked about selling my home, and I talked to a few other people, and here's why I talk about building reports, because they'll call you back and say, man, I really liked working with you. You were the most accommodating person, or a person that kind of felt like you were working in the best interest or the best needs of us. I'd like for you to come back out and take a look at our house again and possibly be able to sell it, for maybe the price that you want. I'll tell you, I'm actually going on an appointment this Saturday with a guy who called me 2 years ago, and he's done some work now more to his property. He's still willing to let it go for a good enough price, and it's only because I built up that kind of rapport with him that now he's willing to call me back almost 2 years later, and wants me to be able to the one working on him with his home than he wants to work with anyone else. So, kind of keep that in mind whenever you're looking at going on that appointment, giving them an offer, even if it's not the offer that they want. Just being professional about it, keeping the best heart and mind with them, building a rapport with them, and explain to them why you're offering the offer that you want to make. And that will get you through that appointment relatively quick and easy, because you really don't want to spend like hours upon hours doing your appointment and going through the process. You really want to either lock it up then or tell them, hey, this isn't the price that we need, and move on to the next step. Now, let's just say if the property does work for you, and we're going to move on to the next steps. Let's say that you've decided that, hey, we've got it for a good enough price. We're going to go ahead and lock into the contract. Next step you need to do is basically just what I said. You need to go under contract. Let me try to spell this out. And go through the selling process. And so when you're locking in a contract, the biggest thing you want to do, we do use a 1-4 family contract. There's, of course, all the different kind of terms that you want to put in there. Typically, if you're going to be getting it for a good enough price, you're going to be paying for all the closing costs. You might want to add that in there. The other thing is that, you want to make sure that the contract's assignable. So either in the buyer section where the buyer's name is, you can put, VW Dynasty Estates / and or assigns, and that will be accountability to be able to assign that contract. Or down in the special provisions, you can put buyer may assign contract to a separate entity, or ISAOA, which stands for its successors and or assignees. And so you can put those two different sections in there. if the seller asks you like, hey, what does that mean? Why do you need to be able to sign the contract? What I do or what I tell them is that we're going to be using private funds on this kind of property. Depends on which lender we're going to use. It depends on what kind of LLC we're going to be putting that contract into. And so without having to go back and redo this whole contract, let's just go ahead and make this contract assignable so that way I don't have to come back, redo this whole thing, and we can just change the name and move on to closing. And so usually that kind of gets past the objection point, why do you need this kind of special provision in there? And so it really makes it pretty easy to be able to get the property under contract. Of course, if you do have a license, always disclose that you do have a license as well. I usually do this when you're on the phone, first time you're on the phone with them. I also do this whenever you're at the appointment, and then I also do that, of course, during the contract. So you're basically 3 times in a row kind of covering your butt as far as making sure that you are in the right whenever you're actually putting that property under contract. And then from that point, really, you're going to go on to the selling stage of the process. And think about it like this, you've got, whenever you put the property in contract, you want about at least a minimum of 10 days. Sometimes I put 15 days as an option period, and that allows you the time to be able to market and sell the property without, of course, having any kind of earnest money at risk. And so during that option period, literally the first day, you want to, of course, make sure you've gotten some pictures from your appointment. You want to put it into an email system. You want to email that property out. And then once you email it out, of course, if you've got a good buyers list that you've, of course, built up, then you want to be able to, get the property to be able to show it. Now, here's where the kind of tricky part becomes, because sometimes the property is vacant, which makes it extremely easy. Just give them the lockbox code. They can go over there, take a look, view it, do whatever they need to, and that's easy. Sometimes there's a tenant in place, and sometimes the owner's still living there. So a lot of times it kind of depends on how you structure yourself or how you set yourself up at the appointment based upon the situation that they're in. A lot of times what I'll tell them is that, one or two things. You can tell them, hey, I'm an investor. I'm also work with several I work with an investment group, and depending upon who's going to give me the money for the project, depends upon who's actually, those kind of lenders need to be able to get inside the property and view it. So you see a lot of investors or wholesalers go out there and they do like these group tours or group showings where, they've got 1 to 2 hour time period blocked out when they got basically an email blast sent out, and all these buyers come through the property and take a look. Well, most of the time what the wholesaler is doing is telling the seller that either, one, we've got a bunch of lenders that need to be able to get inside the property to be able to view it, to see if this is the property that they want to loan on, and or, hey, I'm an investor, I work with a group of investors, and these are the kind of buyers that are wanting to come view the property to be able to help, fund the project. So when we get down to closing, we're good to go. So those are the kind of 2 ways that you can approach it. With the buyer is, of course, the seller is, of course, inside the property. You need to get your buyers inside. The other thing that you can do, which I like to do, is, I kind of have, whenever I email the property out, I typically have like 2 or 3 people that I've worked with before that are very interested in the property, that I know buy property in the area, and I'll just kind of do a 1-by-1 showing and just tell the homeowner, hey, I've got an inspector coming by, or hey, I've got a contractor coming by, or hey, I've got a floor guy coming by, or hey, I have a lender coming by and wants to view the property. So just kind of depends on how you want to set those up, how many times that you think you can get away with it or go do it, because you don't want to, of course, keep bombarding him with showings. And if you've got a superb amount of interest in the property, that's when you should really consider doing more of a group showing and setting it up in that kind of fashion than you would just doing onesie-twosies and getting people inside the property. So just kind of depends on what you're looking for. Depends on what the amount of attraction you get whenever you email blast that property out. And that will depend upon, how you're actually going to go out there and get people inside the properties. And then they could say, okay, this is the house that they want, and they want to move forward. So now, the last step of the process, once you've gone through all this, and now you're in the steps of actually selling the home, you've sold the home, somebody says, hey, I want to buy the property. I'm going to kind of bring this down a little bit so you can see. The 5th step in the process is going to be basically contracting the property on the back end. and then closing it at title. Now, contract, if you go into your agent file packet, we have included basically an assignment agreement that's in there for any kind of assignments that you want to do in your business. And so that's going to allow you to be able to assign the rights, the privileges, everything that's in that original contract up here to the new buyer down there. And so what's going to happen is you're going to basically fill that out as if you were the now seller, assigning that contract to the new buyer. The buyer is going to pay you an assignment fee of the difference between what you have in contract with that seller and what they're going to be paying for it. And then you're going to have a set closing date, which is usually mirrored with that original contract. And once they sign that contract, you have to disclose and you have to give that new buyer that original contract. That's very important. That has to be done upon signing the assignment contract, and that has to be given to the buyer, to the new buyer of the original contract that you signed with that seller. So basically discloses all the underlying terms and conditions that you've agreed to with that seller that's now being passed along to that new buyer. They're going to be responsible for anything inside that contract. Now, here's another thing that you can do when you go into this contract and closing portion of your wholesaling business. Now, what I've experienced in the past is that whenever you're selling a property, wholesaling it to a new buyer, a lot of times if that assignment fee is like over about $15,000, it seems like buyers are just not willing to pay that whatever price you're marketing it for, and they typically kick back and say, "Oh, well, I'm not paying you a $20,000 assignment fee," or "I'm not." No way. I mean, you shouldn't be making that kind of money on this kind of deal. And so take this as a rule of thumb. When you're selling the property, usually $5,000, $10,000, sometimes $15,000 assignment fees are, a reasonable enough fee that the buyer's not going to kick back and say something, as far as like, "Oh, you shouldn't be receiving that kind of money," or, "Oh, you're making too much on this deal." Typically, once it gets over 15, what you're going to need to do is called a double closing, which that is set up a little differently, is structured a little differently at closing and with the contract. With a double close, what you're going to do with that contract is set it up the same as the Trek 1 to 4 family. So essentially, you're going to have one contract that's going to be between buyer or the you wholesaler and the seller. That's going to be one Trek to 4 family. Maybe it's for $50,000. The next contract is going to be between you and the new buyer, and maybe that contract's for $80,000, and it's going to basically mirror the same exact terms. Now, the good thing about that is that you do not have to give that original seller, that new buyer, you don't have to give them that original contract. So the great thing about that is that they don't know the terms, they don't know the price, they have no idea what you're actually paying for it, and they have no idea what the difference in those prices are. And the reason why you want to do that too is because you don't want to give up, the idea, or you don't want a contract to fall through because someone thinks you're making too much money, even though they love the price and they think that's the best price in the world that they can get that property for. So that's a way to also be able to double close the property. Also, just as a rule of thumb, if you are wholesaling any kind of REO, HUD Home, auction.com, we're buying houses from the county court steps, those kind of properties, typically they will not allow an assignment clause inside that contract, and so you're going to have to double close those anyways. I'd say the biggest thing about those is always make sure you have enough spread in there for intermediate funding or double closing funding, because you're going to need some sort of funds to be able to close that property on the front end, and then a day or 2 days goes by and the contract's going to close on the back end. If you do need intermediate funding, let me know. I do have a few lenders that do projects like that, and so they do it all across the Texas market. So whenever you run into that kind of deal, reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to help you set up those kinds of transactions. But essentially, once you got those kind of contracts set up, either through an assignment or double closing, you're going to go down to title. Of course, title, you want to use whatever title company you're using. It's typically the one that most buyers are going to jump on board with, and also sellers as well. The the title company you want to use, of course, you want to be investment savvy, that understand assignments, that understand double closings. because I've had a few title companies I've worked with, and typically it was a new time wholesaler that they really didn't understand assignments, and I had to explain to them the process, and they really weren't understanding it. So I basically had to cancel that title company and move on to a new title company and kind of go through the process. And so, guys, that's one of the biggest factors you don't want to have you screw up your deal down the line, is having a title company that's going to ruin this whole process after you've gone ahead and done all this work. So that's one of the biggest things is make sure you got the right title company. Make sure all your contracts and your ducks are in a row. And then once you get everything to the closing table, really, that's the great thing about wholesaling is you don't have to actually be there at closing or sign any kind of documents. The back end buyer is going to sign, the original seller is going to sign, and then you're going to get a check for the difference of that mailed or wired to your bank account. So it's really a great system and a great process that you can use that you really don't have to do a whole lot of work for. Really building your buyers list is pretty simple. Marketing for sellers is probably the hardest part of this process. Going on the appointment and setting up the contract, those are probably one of the two. Setting up the contract is relatively easy, but going on the appointment is a good way to have other people help you do that process, and it helps set systems up to market for sellers. And so the great thing I like about this business is it can be replicated relatively easy. It can be built pretty easily, and you can be automated relatively easy, where you're not having to really do, or you can automatically set up that marketing for your sellers. You can have people help you go on the appointments. You can have a sales manager help you sell the property and go through the process, and then contract to close is relatively easy. And so think about it whenever you start setting up your business as a whole. When you go from A all the way down to Z, it can be done relatively quick and easy, and it can be done with relatively hardly any kind of hands-on or hand-holding through the process. And so think about it whenever you're building your business. If you want to start doing just onesie, twosie type deals, or if you really want to build an entire business from this, where you've got extra people helping you through the process, and they're usually taking pieces of the pie. So think about that when you're building your business. If you want to have some more ideas about actually marketing for buyers or marketing for sellers, go back and read some of the training material that we've gone through and that we've already covered. That'll kind of give you some ideas about how you can really market for those kind of buyers and or sellers. Start co-wholesaling. A great way to kind of get into front of the business is to start working with wholesalers that are newer or that don't really have a big buyers list, or maybe they don't have a lot of sellers, but they're building up a lot of buyers. Start working with those kind of people if you can. And then when you go through this process and you need help with that, of course, only reach out to either me or some of our team members that can help you take step-by-steps, through that process and be able to help you out. And so, guys, that kind of covers our training for today. Kind of goes through every step of the process, whether you're looking to build up your buyers list or sellers list, going on the appointment, and some tips and tricks about how to do that. I will possibly be doing some more training on wholesaling that goes into a little more detail about marketing for buyers and sellers. If that's something you'd like to have more training on, please post it in the Facebook group page, and I'll schedule a time when we can start doing some more training like that. In the meantime, hopefully this helps you in your wholesaling business. Go out there and create some more deals. Hopefully you can get some new sellers today, and hopefully go out and sell some more property. So with that, guys, I'd like to sign off. You have a good week, and I'll talk to you later. Thank you.